With the advent of blockchain technology, a new paradigm emerges to raise the bar in the sporting world. Introducing Casey Schwab of the National Football League Players Association, Jeff Marsilio with the National Basketball Association, and head of global blockchain business development at ConsenSys Sports, Brad Feinstein.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to do a quick intro. My name is Brad, as you heard, ex-JV basketball superstar, retired NFL player, left out, and fantasy sports legend. We have Jeff, who you've already mentioned from the NBA, Casey from the NFL Players Association. So it is quite fun and exciting to have both Players Association and League on stage today. And we're going to start this panel by hearing a little bit about what they do for their organizations. Jeff, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I oversee a group called New Media, which is responsible for the digital partnerships of the NBA, ranging from things like social media and app distribution to more emerging technologies like immersive media and, of course, things like blockchain.
Very good. Casey.
So, Jeff, you didn't mention that you were a lawyer by trade. So we are both lawyers by trade, but the good type, right, Jeff?
Right, the good lawyers.
So I'm the VP of Business and Legal Affairs at the PA. So just to back up a little bit, the NFLPA is a traditional labor union, just like any other labor union. So steelworkers, public school teachers. The difference being our members are celebrities that have monetization power. So my job comes in on that latter part. I'm not a labor lawyer. I'm a commercial lawyer slash business first lawyer that oversees the rights to our players in the commercial space. So jerseys, Nike Fanatics jerseys, EA, Electronic Arts, their Madden video game, and then trading cards. So overseeing all of the commercial aspects of the union.
Very good. So why don't we start by talking about layer 2 scalability? No, we're going to start with, if you could talk about the process of adopting new technology at the NBA, NFLPA, maybe one of the successes that you've seen and how you think it's going to move forward.
Shall I begin?
Sure.
There isn't just one process for technology adoption at the NBA. Most commonly, we recognize a business need, or we see an area where we can improve a fan experience, and we go to the marketplace and we try to identify something in the marketplace that addresses that need. It's often the case that through our network of partners, we have inbound interest from startups and companies with new technology. So we're always trying to survey that space too. Occasionally, there'll be a technology or almost a wave of interest in a sector, as there has been with blockchain, where we'll make a more coordinated and concerted effort. And we have a group at the NBA called the Global Innovation Group that's overseen by Amy Brooks that runs more of those kinds of formal processes. And in the case of blockchain, we had some people submit, actually one of them is here today, Richard. Hi, how are you? Submit an idea for exploring blockchain and how it might impact our business. And through my own personal interest in the space, I volunteered to be involved, and we've been trying to educate ourselves and educate the league on what it might mean to implement blockchain in sports.
Casey?
Sure. So I mentioned we have apparel, we have video games, and we have trading cards are the big categories historically that labor unions will monetize. So if you think about athletes being used commercially, the collective group of athletes, those are the three big categories. That was the case for about 23 years, and about 2 years ago, we launched something similar to what the NBA has, what the NFL has. I think the MLB has it too, an innovation lab. Because what we saw was, so we're working with these multi-million, billion-dollar companies. We're working with the Visas, the Microsofts. They're cash-heavy companies. But what was being left out were the startups. And the classic example is Bitmoji. So Bitmoji came in, we had a bunch of really good conversations with them, and the price tag on a license to license the intellectual property rights of NFL players was too high because they were just a startup. They said to us, can we give you equity, a point or two? At the time we said, well, we don't really do that, so let us know when you can come back and afford a license. And from that experience and others, we thought, how do we expand from just mature companies, and how do we start getting into adolescent companies, or even companies that are still at ideation stage, and that really makes sense for our business. So since launching that initiative, which is called the One Team Collective, we've done 12 deals to date. And the number is low in 2 years because we're not a traditional, like a VC fund where we're just making a bunch of bets. We're really looking at these companies to see which ones make sense for us. So I think we'll talk about some of them, Brad. But we really want to be selective because we are a labor union. Even though we're running a commercial business, it looks a little bit different. So through the One Team Collective, we have an application process. We get somewhere between 400 and 500 applications a year. Been around for 2 years. We've done 12 deals. Doesn't take a mathematician to know that it's a pretty low success rate because of how selective we are with, so two things. The first thing is it has to be an interesting business, right? That's obvious. But it also has to fit what we do. And what we do is we represent NFL athletes. So that's on the field, that's off the field, and we've identified several companies in the blockchain space that we think are really interesting, which we can talk about. And we've also identified a couple of use cases internally that are business problems that we think blockchain can be a solution for, which frankly, I think that's the way that companies should be looking at blockchain. Isn't, well, how can we implement blockchain? Rather, we got all these business problems. Well, there's this new tech. Does it fit for any of them? And if so, what are the costs and how do we implement it?
Yeah, so great question. Outside of getting to want to talk to me, what has gotten you both interested in blockchain? Want to go first? Casey, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I was telling the guys before we started that the panel right before us, not just right before us, but the panel before us, there was a couple folks in the legal space. And I was making the joke to these guys that that's actually where my interest in blockchain started. Something called ODR, online dispute resolution. So nothing to do with sports. And I was a volunteer mediator, and I would go to the courthouse, and it would blow my mind how inefficient it was for these high volume, low dollar cases. We're talking landlord-tenant cases over $1,000 deposit. You're talking small claims cases, neighbor disputes. And it's taking up the judicial system's time, it's taking up the plaintiff's time, the defendant's time. And so a friend and a business partner and I started an ODR business, and through that, got really interested into blockchain. The business was folded for a bunch of reasons. Moved on, I joined the PA, and then the blockchain craze started, was 2017-ish, and there started to be these use cases, like I mentioned before, in our business, from digital assets to authenticating our products to managing our data, where I remembered my time, in ODR and thought, maybe this tech can apply to these business problems that I'm not facing.
Jeff?
Well, you know, one of the things that's, I think, interesting and different about sports leagues as compared to other companies is that, at least from a fan experience perspective, it's very decentralized and very distributed. You have the owner of the arena, you have the owner of the team, you have the manufacturer and the retailer of the merchandise. You have millions of fans creating content that they share with each other.
The players?
You have the hundreds of amazing players who play, who create the product from their performances. You have all these different nodes in the network that are working together to try to create something like a cohesive experience, or at least you hope that it's a cohesive experience for the fans. And it's an extraordinary opportunity because so much of the value for the fan and therefore for the league arises out of all of these connections. But it's a challenge too, because we want to make that cohesive. So one of the things that interests me that I'm still really grappling with about blockchain is that it is at its core about cross-organizational access to shared data. And you can use that in all kinds of ways that we found to be interesting. I think one way, I had a friend call me this week. He had taken his kids to see the Sixers play, and he bought the tickets digitally. And it wasn't until after the game that he realized, shoot, I don't have anything to put in their scrapbook. So he called me and he asked whether I had any tickets for him. Now, right now, the way it works today, there really isn't a good way to collect digital items, the digital memorabilia that we've been collecting for decades as fans. But it's just an example of how blockchain might help. You could really create a kind of scarcity with blockchain out of these moments in the digital sphere and make them collectible and make them actually be able to travel across platforms and across partnerships, and you can carry those memorabilia with you throughout your fan experience.
And in both of your situations, right, you're on the front lines of whether it's talking to owners and teams or players. What are the most common misconceptions that you're hearing, and how are you alleviating those questions and concerns?
I think there's a kind of blockchain extremism right now, because you have really just the two ends of the spectrum. You have lots of people who think it's total malarkey and
choice.
Completely useless.
Good choice.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna, malarkey. And then you have people who think it's something magical that you could just sprinkle anywhere and it will somehow create value. Here's the value. So we're trying to do, I think, what Casey suggested earlier, which is identify real business cases where this can make a difference, and begin educating the business units throughout the NBA on how it could make a difference. So it's just a matter of educating people about what it really is. It's not magical and it's not nothing, and getting people to really engage with it.
So that latter category of people is really interesting to me, because I want to talk about decentralized bosses. I obviously have a boss, and then there's the boss, the head of the union, DeMore Smith. But working for a labor union, we work for the players. So I have 2,000 bosses, and it changes. When new guys get drafted, we just had the draft, the NFL draft. Well, all those guys kind of become my bosses, but they're football players. They're 22 years old, and so my job is really interesting. And I say that in a positive way, that often there's conversations with my bosses, the players who I work for, in which I'm the one actually educating. And I wouldn't say I'm a blockchain expert. All of you in the room are probably more experts than I am. I know just enough to be dangerous, to talk to people like Brad and others in the room to educate me on it. But I know enough to talk to the players. When I get a call from a player, this actually happened, saying, "Why aren't we investing in the blockchain?" Okay, what do you mean? Which blockchain? Which company based in the blockchain? Which company that's using blockchain in what way? Well, the blockchain. I was reading a Forbes article. Why aren't we invested in the blockchain? And that becomes a conversation with delicate gloves of explaining, without being patronizing, without being condescending, because this player is my boss, technically one of 2,000, of what the blockchain is. But the encouraging part is that our NFL players are unbelievably interested in this stuff, probably believably educated, but if they have the interest, then the education comes easy. And the interest in new tech generally was part of the reason why we launched the One Team Collective, because what it did was it just expanded our network. It expanded to VCs, PEs, but also all the startups. And we can now say to our players, hey, we're not making a recommendation that you go become an advisor or you invest, but if you're interested in this space, whether it's VR, AR, blockchain, here's some folks that you should maybe talk to. And that's one of the most rewarding things for me, is taking these guys, these young kids who are playing football, that have a very limited career on the field and saying, how do you get more out of football than football gets out of you? I'm going to start making introductions now.
So on both of your sides, you have to love all of your children equally. I most certainly do not. I'm a lifelong Knicks fan and a Giants fan. And recently, both of those journeys have been very tough. So blockchain offers new applications for fandom. What do you think are going to be the first consumer adoptions into your organizations of the technology? Jeff, why don't you start?
One area, I don't want to predict what will be first. I think we talked about collectibles, and I think that's relatively low-hanging fruit because it's very additive. It doesn't necessarily have to mean we have to rip anything out and replace it. Ticketing is really interesting too because it both protects the fan in terms of assuring of the authenticity of the tickets, but it also gives us a kind of a second-order effect of allowing us to participate in potentially in the secondary market. That's an interesting one, but it could be a little bit more disruptive. I talked before about the fact that we are, as a league, we're a network of partnerships and a network of players and a network of fans. And I think at some point soon, we'll explore how we create a next generation of loyalty program where every decision, every activity you make as a fan gets recognized across all of our partnerships, whether you're buying a basketball at a retail store or watching a TV, a game on a TV, or tweeting about us. It gets recognized as part of your fan profile, and you can be rewarded for it, and we can have more of a direct relationship with those fans across all of those connections. I won't say that that's soon, but I think it's really interesting, and I think we'll eventually see something like that.
Thank you. Casey?
Yeah, mine goes back to what I said first, which is solving a problem. One of the big problems in our world is counterfeit jerseys. So you have these two buckets. You have jerseys, which the counterfeit problem is massive. The FBI estimates like a minimum of a third of NFL jerseys are fraudulent, and it's insane to think that 1 out of 3 jerseys that people are wearing on the street are unlicensed, and therefore, obviously, we're not getting our royalties. The leagues aren't getting their royalties. The second bucket, you mentioned the Giants, is memorabilia. And when we talk about the benefits of the blockchain, it's all about immutability and eliminating trust, or creating trust through digital technology to eliminate the need for trust between human beings. Eli Manning, quarterback for the New York Giants, who I hope you're still a fan, despite the last few years.
Lifelong. They gave me 2 titles in my lifetime. It's pretty good.
Good. So Eli was embroiled in a lawsuit a few years ago, settled in 2018 over game-worn memorabilia in which the plaintiffs of the lawsuit, the consumers, sued Eli, amongst other folks, his agents, to say they weren't game-worn. So when I think about blockchain, you don't have to know anything about sports. If you're in the room now and you're thinking about, okay, a game-worn shirt, well, it's pretty easy to apply, or at least theoretically apply, blockchain to that game-worn item. So if and when there's ever a claim by anyone that it's not actually game-worn, you can look back and you can say, no. There's a geotag, time-stamped entry onto the blockchain that, by the way, for all these other reasons, is immutable, that on that day, after that game, Eli took off his jersey, handed it to an equipment manager, and the equipment manager took out his or her phone and uploaded it onto the blockchain. And then each step along the way, that jersey from the equipment manager, there's probably 2 or 3 steps in the middle to getting to the retailer selling that jersey, and then the critical part is the consumer then buys it. Consumer pulls out his or her phone, takes a snapshot of it, and can see that digital record. So it does a couple things. The first thing that would do is create trust and eliminate those problems that give me heartburn, like our players getting sued over game-worn memorabilia that's not really game-worn. That's huge. It's a huge problem, and solving the problem first is, I think, more than half the battle for integrating new technologies into corporate America. But secondly, what that does is it creates more value for that item. So it creates a value for that individual item that person, that consumer, can now go to the world and say, I own this jersey. And I can show to the world that I own this jersey, and anybody who wants to buy this jersey can now find me and know that it's authentic via this platform, this secondary platform. If you're familiar with StockX, Dan Gilbert's StockX sneakers, authenticated sneakers and other items. Why isn't that model being applied in sports memorabilia? And we've been working on this, as Brad knows, for almost 2 years now. So I went to the first two, this solving the problem, increasing the value of that individual item. There's a third benefit. If you were to type in Tom Brady autographed football into eBay right now.
Who's that?
Tom. The other guy.
Yeah, there we go.
The other guy. Daniel Jones autograph sneakers. How about that?
Much better, thank you.
You're gonna go on eBay and you're gonna see all sorts of prices. And any user, and this is not a knock on eBay, but any user is gonna know that there's a risk. There's some percentage of risk that that item that they purchase might not be real.
So can I ask you, why not use, I'm being a little bit of a devil's advocate, but why not use a centralized database for this? I mean, I think most people who are purchasing this memorabilia trust the NFLPA or trust the NFL. If you guys were to operate a centralized database for this, wouldn't you get most of the way there?
In a perfect world in which we trusted all of our agents and our marketing reps and our managers, and the cousin and the mom and the brother and the neighbor around our athletes, if we could trust them, absolutely. But we're not in a perfect world. So there are, when you talk about, you mentioned like all these different entities in the ecosphere of sports. So when I think about that, just for this specific use case, I think you got the athlete. And a little bit of it is protecting him against himself, right? That's part of this. I'm not gonna go any further on that. But protecting him against himself, so you have the athlete. You have the equipment manager or whoever works for the club. Then you have the group of people around the athlete. Then you have the manufacturer / retailer, seller of the item. So we sit in the middle of it, which is both good and bad. So to your point, I think consumers would trust an NFLPA seal on these items. But we don't control the whole supply chain. There's at least 6, if not more, steps before it gets to the consumer. And we can draft contracts, we can have them sign affidavits, we can do certs of authenticity and do all these enforcement things. But until we can ensure it digitally and really know and eliminate that need for trust of other human beings, I'm not sure that does get us there.
I'll get you guys out here on this because we are, in fact, working on that. There's a product in our group called Viant and OpenLaw, which will actually solve both of these. So it's a supply chain solution tied to smart contracts. So certainly it is on our radar, but we actually have a really fun competition going on here. It's a prediction algorithm using Helena, and there's a big game tonight, and Joe Lubin is from Toronto. So we're not gonna make any markets right now, but I certainly would love to hear as we wind down, who you guys might think will win tonight in the big game.
I think it's going to be an incredibly competitive game.
Oh, come on.
I'm not going to make
recorded, right?
I'm not going to make any predictions. It gets me in trouble either way, but I think it'll be an incredibly. You should tune in. You should watch it.
Right. Casey, you'll give us something, right?
I see some Toronto signs from the Lubin family.
Despite the Drake curse, I'm going with Toronto. I think I'm going with Toronto. The claw, dude is. See, I could be a fan of the NBA, and the Kawhi is not that this is what we're talking about, but Kawhi is unreal. The guy's having an unreal playoff run. I think he's still, in fact, underrated.
So we have consensus here to say that we think it's going to be Toronto.
I think it's going to be Toronto.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Casey.